Thanks everybody for coming. We're going to do to this shoreline workshop here with the Lake Association. My name is Sam. I'm the Lake Association's biologist. I'm going to just quickly talk about some definitions and the importance of some best management practices for erosion that you may be having. And then we're going to have Habitat Landscaping do a bigger presentation on bioengineering your shoreline. So we're here to just help get you educated on, on what's best for your shoreline stability, and that's different for every site. So it's truly specific to your property, may be different than your neighbor's property. So there's no shame. You might see some photos in here. We're just here to talk about all of the options that are out there for the health of the lake. So first, I'm just going to talk about kind of how your property is broken up. You've got 4 zones. You've got the upland zone, the buffer zone, and then that little gray spot there in the middle is the shoreline, and then the lake. So we're going to focus, the lake zone. We're going to focus specifically on that shoreline, which is just the transition from where the water to land occurs. So it goes from it's not an exact line. So it goes from the top of the bank down to where the land water interface. So sometimes that's 2 inches or sometimes it's 30 feet, and it might vary depending on what your property actually looks like as a whole. So the Lake Association here, there's about 42 miles of shoreline, and about 50% of that has been hardened in some way. And we'll talk about the different ways that can happen. So the map here just kind of shows all of the area that we cover. So we've got Elk River, Elk-Skegemog, the Torch River, and then also part of the Rapid River up to the Arwood Bridge. So on the right-hand side, you'll see that map that's kind of hectic. And that was done, we did a drone survey in 2021, a shoreline survey, and all of those red or orange pins were parcels that had either a seawall or riprap, which is the rocks or the boulders that you'll see. So if you'll notice there's a lot there, which could come off as like pretty bad. It was pinned as with a hardened shoreline if you had rocks there at all, but there are ways that you'll see later on that you can have the rocks and it'll have a lesser impact. But just remember that this is kind of zoomed out, so it looks really intimidating, but if you zoom in there, we actually have a lot of natural shoreline on Elk Lakes and Skegemog, of course, because it's so protected. So we're really lucky. We're doing okay, we're in good shape. You'll see all of those pins. It can be kind of daunting to look at that. Some of this hardened shoreline has been put in there to protect municipalities, to protect roads, but most of it has been put in to protect residential properties. Slides here. So most shorelines erode naturally, and the rate of erosion is typically slow, but for a property owner that's concerned about stability of your site, then putting in some sort of armor on your shoreline is a pretty natural response. But what we often forget is that erosion is part of the process that our lakes and waterways go through, and our well-intentioned efforts to prevent the erosion can then have negative effects on the geology and the ecology of the lake as a whole. So you'll see in this picture, this is actually on the south side of Skegemog, southeast side of Skegemog, looking up into the Torch River, so that's Torch Lake up in the background. And you can notice that shoreline is meant to kind of go in and out. There's what some people would look at that and say that, I mean, I guess it technically is erosion, but that's not bad erosion happening in there. It's meant to kind of do that. It's meant to swell and pull that out sometimes. And we just typically have issues with erosions when our houses are becoming in danger, or our sites. So I've got another picture here. It's just a little more zoomed in. This is again on Lake Skegemog from that drone survey that we did. And you can see how it is meant to do that naturally. The south side of Skegemog has never been developed. So this is how it's always been. This is what nature has intended for it to do. And it'll kind of cut in and then come out. And you'll see that there's tons of trees that are left down in the lake. if a new tree falls into the lake, it's left there, and all of that helps to slow the wave energy coming onto the shore and then hold it in place, which is the same thing that aquatic plants do. So the lakes they're dynamic, they're living, they're meant to be changing, never-ending change, and they're also pretty resilient. And so we just have to find that happy medium of how do we protect our property value, and also protect the lake. So there's a wide variety of structures that are built to reduce erosion along the shorelines. We refer to seawalls of various materials like wood on the upper right-hand side, or the bottom, that concrete seawall, or then riprap, those three other photos there. Those are called shoreline hardening or armoring, and riprap can be considered a seawall if it doesn't pass what's called the turtle test. So if a turtle can't easily get out, climb up over those rocks to get to the upland, because there's various species of turtles that have to travel a certain distance to lay their eggs. So that photo in the middle would be considered a riprap seawall, whereas these other photos on the left-hand side there, those would probably pass the turtle test, but it's all about the slope of your shoreline. You want to literally create a ramp for the waves and the ice to be able to come up and break on shore, dissipate that energy, and then come back down, versus where those seawalls quite literally create a wall in the water. So everything kind of smashes into that, and then the critical vegetation, the aquatic life can't get in and out of there. So these seawalls here, they're all designed to break up the wave action, they hold the sediment in place, and then they slow the rates of erosion. But because that armoring changes the way that the waves interact with the shoreline, it leads to increased erosion in nearby shoreline, and then also it can dramatically impact, it'll scour out the bottom there in front of it. So the beach area, or the if you don't have a beach in front of it, the sediment directly under there. So this picture kind of shows waves hitting that seawall, and then if you can imagine a wave coming in, hitting it like this, and the energy is gonna hit the wall and go either direction, and then scour out the bottom, and it's gonna travel down, like all the energy from that wave is gonna travel down until it isn't against a hard surface, and then it'll cut it. So I've done, the Lake Association offers shoreline consultations, and I went to a site a couple years ago, and their neighbor had put in a seawall, and like early spring they put it in, and I went to their house in October. By that fall, they had their massive erosion happening, because it was all cutting in, because it hits the wall and it goes down, and then it was cutting into their property. So then they had to do some pretty dramatic work to their shoreline to protect it because of the seawall. And so it also does that on the bottom, where it'll scour out, because that energy from the waves has to go somewhere. So it'll scour out the bottom, it'll rip up the plants, and that makes it pretty vulnerable for various things like invasive species. A lot of native plants can't quite establish in such a vulnerable area like that, but invasive plants can, which kind of opens up a whole different can of worms with invasive species. And it removes that vegetation from the shoreline, or it doesn't allow it to be there at all, so then that can impact the frogs, and the fish will lay their eggs there, and then the forage fish feed the bigger fish, and so that impacts the food chain. The start of the food chain. So if you can imagine, just looking at this picture here, the armoring quite literally cuts off the lake from nature. So it eliminates the habitat, it impacts the vegetation, like I was saying. So in so many different ways, it interrupts the process that has to happen in our waterways. So the rates of erosion maybe at this one site are diminished or lowered, but then around you and then into the lake, which you're trying to protect, but it's actually having a negative effect on it, are dramatically increased. So it really interrupts that process that helps shape the waterways. Rates of erosion are generally pretty slow. Most properties experience very little risk of long-term damage from erosion. I've done over 60 shoreline consultations, and I don't think that at one of them they were having dramatic erosion issues happen within the past even 5 years. It's typically, we're looking at long-term. Someone said that this riprap has been installed by their parents, 50, 60 years ago, and now it's kind of starting to fall down a little bit, or their neighbors have changed things, so now they're having issues. But especially here on the chain, our water levels are controlled by the dam, so we don't have to deal with the fluctuation very much. We're talking about waves and ice, and so that's where we got to talk about that ramp and allowing everything, the energy to come up on shore and break that way. So though during a storm or heavy ice year, the damage from that can be disconcerting. There are often just simple changes that we can make to a property to reduce that risk of erosion without the recourse of a damaging structure that's also really expensive. So that's where we kind of get into bioengineering. So this just combines your engineering methods with natural materials to mimic more of what nature would look like. It really, you build up that slope. It's typically a 4-to-1 slope, so everything can come up, break, and then you backfill it with vegetation so that the roots are holding that shoreline in place. So I'm not going to go too far into this. This is what habitat landscape is going to talk about. There's just a couple pictures on there that explain it a little bit. And so Habitat is here. They've got over 30 years of experience in mostly this, I believe. They've restored nearly 5,000 feet of shoreline. And I think there's a couple of them that are going to present. So you guys can come up.
Okay, great. Oh, David's hooking that up. So David is the owner, operator, our boss, the chief, the big boss of the company. David's been doing it a long time. The bioengineering or working on shoreline restoration. My name is Kevin Cronk. We have Ryan here. You want to share about Ryan Luce? He's one of the project managers. And then David Stevens, who's been working with us for like 7 years at least. And working on shorelines from day one. That's a picture of the first shoreline he worked on. So we've been doing it. I've been with the company for 8 years. My background is aquatic biology, which I studied and worked in for decades before I started doing this. And now you see our names up there. We have been doing this for a while. David has worked with Tippinut Watershed Council for years, refining the methods for high energy lakes, which is the case with Elk Lake, one of our bigger lakes. It's how big is Elk Lake? About 8,000 acres, maybe. I think the two combined 10,000. So it's got, in many cases, it's got a lot of fetch, where you got over a mile of fetch. So you got big winds and ice forces coming across this lake that cause the erosion Sam was talking about on the shorelines. And anyway, so as David has worked with Watershed Council and others over the years, they refine the methods for dealing with these high energy situations. And I'm going to walk you through kind of what we do, kind of the whole process of shoreline restoration, at least in the way that we do it. So I think I will, go ahead and move up the slide here. Shoreline's in trouble. This is going to be a lot of repetition with what Sam already said, but various things that cause instability and erosion. Actually, wave energy, winds. I did not put in where the wakeboard boats, like on Pine Lake, where they really are causing havoc there, and it led to some jobs for us. So, job security for us, bad for the shorelines and the property owners. The wave energy, winds, ice is one of the most serious problems. There's some lakes where ice. This is actually Douglas Lake here, where we've done about a dozen shorelines since I worked with David, and the ice has pushed up that berm, and once it catches under there, it'll just keep pushing it up and up and up, and become more and more of a problem. The higher it goes, the more it catches. So ice is a big one, probably, I guess, really the number one factor I think, for shoreline erosion. Slopes and soils really play into it. Heavier, you get greater slope, you're going to have more erosion. If you have the soil makeup, you have soils that are sandy, for example, that aren't as tightly bound with organic matter or with clay, they're maybe more susceptible. We found in many cases that seeps and springs and streams, particularly seeps and springs, we had one project where the property owner, they told us the wetland is very wet behind and it was coming through into the shoreline. And we went ahead and built our revetment and our structure for dealing with the erosion. We actually had it sink into the ground because there's so much groundwater pushing through that we had to modify it a bit to make it work. So seeps and springs are often causing this erosion, vegetation loss clearly. Once you get rid of the trees and the plants are holding everything, the root structure that's holding it in place, that is going to affect your shoreline and lead to more erosion on the shoreline. And then stormwater runoff from hard surfaces, whether it's roads or your houses, your driveways, that stormwater runoff will also contribute to that. And in many cases, beyond just working on the shorelines, we end up going up the stream. We start working further in the upland areas of clients' property and addressing things like stormwater. We built rain gardens. We built what we call stormwater streamscapes, where it's kind of replicating a stream channel that diverts the water, slows it down, allows it to be absorbed, and channels it into a structure like a rain garden, so that it does not go directly into the lake, cause erosion throughout the property, and introduce pollutants potentially into the lake. So next slide. So, and Sam already kind of went into this too, shoreline stabilization solutions, as I call it, just different ways that people deal with shoreline erosion through history. She went and talked quite a bit about seawalls, which I really appreciate. Concrete bulkheads, steel bulkheads, wood bulkheads. Those have been used for a long time, but they really don't work because of everything she pointed out. All the problems with it. You can see this one failing ultimately. This is not a place we've worked, but may work in the future. And then we did, the one on the left is actually on Clam Lake, Big Boulder, like called the Big Boulder riprap. And that is also, it's a solution, it's not a good solution. The Big Boulder deflects energy just like the sea, not quite as much as a seawall will, but it deflects energy down the shoreline, eroding adjacent areas, but it also allows waves to crash through and erode from behind. So they'll go between the cracks of the big boulders, and often there's nothing there to stop it from eroding out the shoreline behind. I've actually seen, and when I worked in the water world more so, I've seen where they put 55-gallon drums along the shoreline. There's all kinds of things people have tried over the years. And then I circle bioengineering, which is what we do. And bioengineering, it's basically using biology to find a solution. So it's not the most common use for that word, of course, is genetic recombination and creating genetically modified organisms, GMOs, but this is a different use for the word. So we're using biology to address the erosion on the shoreline. So this is the shoreline we've done up on Crooked Lake, and you can see we're still using riprap. And DQ Eagle, is not terribly fond of riprap necessarily, but again, in these high energy situations on lakes like Elk, if we don't put some riprap in there, we're going to be dealing with, it's not going to work essentially. There's just too much energy on these lakes just to put in other structures. Behind this riprap, we have coir logs I'll show you more of in a bit. And in some cases where you have a low energy lake, particularly in southern Michigan where the lakes are much smaller, you can get away with just putting that coir log in. And even up here, there are situations where just the log will work. But this, I did want to point out that this one has passed the turtle test that she mentioned, because I was meeting there, we did there about 3 times this summer, cleaning out the garden, and turtles have totally taken over 2 or 3 of my mounded up areas where I have a lot of a diverse group of plants. They dug through them and laid their eggs, and oh well, we lost some plants, but so be it. So let's go on to bioengineering. Yeah, it's coming out a little funny because of the, anyway, you have to bear with me with the lines all kind of staggering, the carriage returns or whatever. So, as far as bioengineering goes, this whole process, it requires, of course, initially a site visit. Homeowners will reach out to us, we'll arrange to go see that and check out their shoreline, walk through the problems, do an assessment, both with the owner and then on our own. as to how we can resolve the problems that are occurring on that shoreline. And then we go into that design and planning phase, which is kind of back at the office, we do design and planning. Often we have to go back and do a second or a third, sometimes for several visits, until we come up with a solution that we're happy with, work with the property owner, make sure they're happy. And we have to make sure that the state is happy and the county is happy, so we have to go through, once we have our design and planning in place, we have the clients, the homeowners on board, then we work on the permit piece of it. And we have to get a permit through the state, which takes they have up to 90 days once we submit it to get it back to us. And I think in every case we have got our permits through, correct? I don't think we've ever been rejected completely. We've had to amend it.
Sometimes it's taken some negotiation.
Yeah.
No, we've never been rejected.
Never been rejected. So we're always able to work a solution. And the state, in fact, is sometimes referring homeowners to us because of our experience with the bioengineering. They'll have.
I think we pulled more permits for this kind of work than any other organization in northern Michigan. So DEQ, a couple years ago, sent a contingent of people to tour our sites because we're using this successfully more than anybody else in this part of the state.
Yeah, which is it's a win-win situation because clients are ultimately coming to us once Eagle has referred a few at least. In my area, I work up in the Petoskey area, but referred them to us directly. So anyway, so once we get through the permit process, again, it can take, a permit's something you do have to think about. A homeowner will come to us and say, hey, my shoreline's eroding, we need it fixed yesterday. And we're like, well, we do it by the book, so it's gonna take up to 90, it takes time. So often what we try to do is work with a homeowner, like, right now is a great time to start the conversation, work on the permits through the winter, and start up in the spring and get the whole thing going. So, and the county permit's actually fairly easy. We can use a lot of information from the Eagle permit and submit a county permit, get it permitted within, generally within a week. And then we move on to revetment construction, which I'm going to go through some of that. Oh, yeah, I guess this is too long. Revetment construction, and then the plantings, the greenhouse, or the riparian vegetation. So we go ahead. So, and this was on one of Sam's slides there, the biology, the revetment, as we call it. And there's two different approaches we take to stabilizing the shoreline. The coir log revetment, we've gotten this too, but these are the main two. The coir log revetment is using a coconut fiber log that is put up directly against the shoreline. So oftentimes we have to go through and modify that shoreline, straighten it out, take roots off, just make it even enough that we can lay these coir logs. Coir logs are, again, coconut fiber, I think imported from Thailand or somewhere. And they're 10 feet sections, and they are from 12 inches thick to 20 inches thick. And so depending on how much of a drop you have, how much erosion, we pick the correct coir log. We have found with the coir logs that they don't work very well unless they're at least partially in water for most of the year, because their water is water soaking into these coir logs. The plantings we put behind them will grow into those logs, will be the long-term solution to the erosion. But if there's no water, if they're high and dry, then the roots they potentially will dry out the roots and kill all the plantings that we have behind them. So I'll show you in a minute the other solution when you're up out of the water. So in front of the coir log, we put I don't have a scale bar here, but it's about 6 feet out. The Eagle gives us a 6-foot limit from the shoreline edge to here, where we put our toe stones. We put pretty big stones, 12 to 18 inches in diameter, typically, and we angle them. This isn't actually the best picture of it, but we put them in so that the ice and waves will ride up our revetment here, our rock revetment. And we use some bigger stones as anchors within there, and we use smaller stones packed in, which both lock everything together and act as ball bearings to allow the waves and ice to ride up. On the bottom, I should have mentioned that first, or previously, but the keystone layer, we actually use more of a gravel, kind of angular gravel now, because it locks together. Initially we're using keystone. When we find the angular gravel works better, we put that in a wedge from the coir log going down to prevent when waves do hit the structure, they don't wash out the soils underneath. So, yeah, and then the final piece is, of course, the putting the plantings in. We built all of that, and then we, and I wish I had your pictures here. We're just completing a project on Elk Lake, and but David will be showing several of completed projects. But yeah, Ryan, it was just today you guys finished?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just this afternoon.
Yeah, down in Ennis Lane, on this side of Elk Lake toward the south, they just completed 200 feet of shoreline using this approach. Wow, not exactly. Next slide.
Can I say a few things?
Oh, yes, you definitely do.
There's,
Soil amendment.
going back to the coir log, we used to put coir logs in all the time. And then we started finding that if that's not wet, if that log is not wet, the plants, we try to build, we call that the revetment, the whole thing. And our goal is to get the plants to grow right into the revetment and grow right down into the water. And as much as possible, we try to use semi-aquatic plants within the revetment. So sometimes we'll even plant in the revetment while we're building it, because that is the littoral zone of the lake. That's where all the life happens. And not only does the turtle test matter, but we build mass with many small stones. So that allows plants to grow through it. That allows organic matter to build up in it. And our goal in 10, 15 years is that that entire thing is vegetated. It's collected organic matter from the lake. The plants, the upland plants have grown into the coir log because they're getting nutrients from the lake water that is soaked into those coir logs. So if you have an erosion problem, you're talking to a company about fixing the problem. Some guys are out there using coir logs like Lincoln logs. They're using them like building blocks, and it's not going to work, you know. And we've been there. We've tried that. What happens over time is that coir log is going to go away. It's going to decompose, and then the whole thing kind of collapses in on itself. And if that coir log's not wet, it doesn't get full of root mass and organic matter. It's just creating a void and a barrier that the plants can't grow through. So one clue you can see if somebody knows what they're talking about is they want to use a coir log. That log has to be wet. It can't be elevated out of the water. And Kevin's going to go on and show what we do when we can't use a coir log and keep it in the water, what our solution is.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, great points. I just have a few slides showing you the coir log construction process. This is a place on Wallen Lake where we did 180 feet at McDougal's. And the first thing after we straightened the shoreline, in fact, in this situation, which we also dealt with somewhat there in this lane here on Elk Lake last month, is there were a lot of voids underneath all these trees, birch trees, cedar trees. There were literally voids under these that I could crawl in. And we had to pack those all with rock, gravel, cobble mix before we put the logs in. So we had to stabilize everything behind it, maybe cut a few things out just so we get the logs to fit in right. And so we put logs all the way down, we stake them in, we pound in the stakes so that the twine pulls them down, and we can see there at the junction between two, we tie them together so they're all interlaced. So it just provides more and more long-term stability so our projects won't, they'll make it through the long haul. And I guess I should have pointed out at the beginning that when you do bioengineering, everything has to be biodegradable. So everything we do, the stakes, the twine, everything is, choose some kind of biodegradable element. Let's go to the next slide. Sorry.
Is that finished?
Is that, no, sorry, that is.
That's only the coir log in place. You have not put it there.
Correct.
No.
That's just what's in.
Yeah,
That was in about the middle of the project. We'll show you a bunch of.
No, because I was wondering why the rock did not be to
Right.
the top of it. It exposed the coir log to.
I lost the slide. I'm gonna back up so I can show you back to the final. I must actually let me delete this slide somehow. So this is the finished product here. So here's your coir log. It's almost invisible at this point. And like David says every time, is that soaking up the water and the plants are invading it. In this situation, I don't think we planted the dough. we did not, but there was already a number of different aquatic plants growing in this area, which have, subsequently were invaded. But in many situations, we do plant right near the toe. But anyway, you get your rock, your coir, that's the final product of your plantings. And that was just, that might have been just year one, so the plantings are just starting. Within a couple, 3-4 years, it'll be a lushly vegetated shoreline.
The actual proper use of the coir log is to stake it out in the water and have it break the wave energy while the plants shoreward of it get an opportunity to get established and root out. The Watershed Council developed this years ago, and we've been riffing on it since then. We've been improving it, riffing on it, and now we only use the coir logs sometimes. They're expensive, they gotta get shipped across the world. And so they're not a universal solution. And the best way to use it is to put it out in the water, stake it in. It breaks the wave energy in a low to medium energy site and gives the shoreward plants a chance to get established. And this is our alternative to the coir.
Yeah, which is the soil lift. And it's really essentially the same diagram. It looks just like it. The only difference is that instead of a coir log, we have an encapsulated soil lift. Its full name is. And this is us building our very first soil lift actually on Douglas. This is an interesting situation. Sam was talking about how the lake level is controlled here, so you don't have those fluctuations as much. Douglas Lake literally goes in and out. Some areas probably 50 feet. They have high water in the spring that in this picture would be up above this structure, up onto the upper beach there. And then this is later in the summer. This is probably actually the fall because it's when David first started. It was October or something when you came in. And so we prefer to do them on that lake in the fall because it makes it easy to work. You don't have to work in the water so much. But anyway, you can see where basically the soil lift is dirt wrapped up in biodegradable erosion blanket. And I typically just call it dirt burrito for people. It's a burrito filled with dirt. And then we do the same approach with, we do a toe stone in the front. You can see the pea stone there. And then we start putting in bigger stone, then we start locking it all together. So in this situation, is in Douglas, almost every one we've done, except for Whip Hop in the beginning maybe, has been a soil lift because of that extreme change in water levels. So they have several months every year where if we had a coir log, there'd be high and dry. So soil lift allows things to grow into that dirt burrito. The roots are getting established in there. And when it dries up, it doesn't matter. So, can you go one more? Hopefully. So this is the finished product here. You can see in the soil lift itself, we've dug holes and we've planted, in this case it was sand cherry, very sandy area. And then we can continue to plant it up more and more. You can also see at the toe of the ribbon, see the red plant here. I believe those, they already had a lot of native vegetation, 3-square bulrush and other things, and we planted willows all through the toe here to lock things up. And it's been really effective. This is done, again, 7 or 8 years ago, so it's, I think I have another picture of the mature shoreline. So here it is, several years later, all planted up.
In the wintertime, that's pretty much underwater. This is a summertime picture, but all those rocks will be underwater in the wintertime.
Why in the winter?
That's when can you answer?
Well, because what happens in Douglas Lake, the Maple River is its only outlet, and the Maple River freezes up and causes a back, based all the water draining in after that.
Like I know, Lake, you're more in the level.
Right.
So
And Douglas,
it's
there's
the
no,
opposite, right?
right. Douglas, there's no way to lower and control the water level. You control it all by nature, which is the natural cycle of things on that lake. So yeah, it's an interesting lake in that respect, and they do have a lot of problems with erosion, maybe related.
The ice push on that lake is phenomenal.
What was your burrito made up of? I didn't catch the material.
Oh, what's inside? Oh, so we use fabrics that are jute or coconut fiber fabrics. We actually use a double layer.
Yes.
Yeah, so we do a fabric that has like a heavy jute ply. It's got a high tensile strength, so it'll hold together it's got big aperture, so big holes in it.
Tell me your algae story.
The algae story?
Yeah,
All right.
when you guys went back after.
Yeah, over to the bond project this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on the same lake. So what we double wrap it because one has the holes in it, one doesn't. And regardless of even double wrapping it, some of the soil will leach out. And so we showed up at Vaughn, the project we did last year, and I'm going along the shoreline, checking things out. We're just doing light weeding for them, checking out the structure, making sure it was intact. And there's algae along the shoreline. So not for algae, which I'm very familiar with, like, oh my gosh, I was like, something's going on here. There's like a septic problem, or there's a lot of nutrients getting in the lake. Until my coworker James is not here, like, pointed back at the revetment that we just built with all that dirt washed into the lake, which does happen. We'll get
It's
some.
natural material.
Yeah, it's all natural, so it's topsoil and compost mixed in there for the plants, but some of it does leach out, and that's happened now at least 2 or 3 of my projects, but the very next year it's usually gone. So it's just that short-term impact. And we try to prevent and reduce that obviously as much as possible. Yeah, I think it's on you.
Oh, okay. Well, now we'll talk about like some matured shoreline, so you can see what the end result is. Thanks, Kevin. This is on Clam Lake, and I chose this picture. You know, when the revetment is built, when the engineering is done, that's when we plant the plants. And one of the most common things I see when people plant up their shorelines is they don't plant it densely enough. If you want to establish a very dense root mass, and like I said before, you want to encourage those plants to grow right into that rock revetment as much as possible, because those roots will lock everything up. And it's kind of your second line of defense. On a lake with a lot of ice push, these small stones that we use, sometimes those stones will get pushed up onto the shore, or they'll get dragged out into the littoral zone, the lake floor, and you need to go back. You know, if you have a hard winter with a lot of ice, a lot of freeze thaw, because if you imagine you fill a glass full of water, put it in the freezer, and then that ice freezes and it cracks the glass. It's the same thing that's happening in the lakes. You've got a frozen lake, and in the course of a day, the temperature changes 15 degrees. Nothing's going to stop that ice from. We've seen it push trees this big, 8 feet right up the shore, just boom. So sometimes you need to maintain your revetment. You need to put the rocks back. But in the event that your rocks get pushed around, or it can't be maintained, or it's really bad, you have that root mass in there. That's kind of your second line of defense, besides the engineered revetment. This is, even though you need to plant up densely, you can create different kinds of looks. This is more of an orderly, garden-like green belt. That's potentilla and butterfly weed, and there's some Joe Pye weed there, and switchgrass, which is a great grass. We like to use the things that are going to give you the best root mass, the deepest roots, are shrubs and bunch grasses. We usually use native plants, mostly. There's the reason, the DEQ likes to see that. That's what they want us to do. The thing that native plants do that nothing else do is they feed the bugs. So if we want fish and we want birds, we need to feed the bugs. Native plants are the only plants that feed our native bugs. I'm going to say something here because there's a lot of hyperbole about native plants. People say the roots are deeper. Well, that's not true. People say they're less maintenance. That's not true. That they're not any less maintenance than exotic plants. There's exotic plants with deep roots. Their native plants can be invasive just like exotic plants. The one thing exotic plants can't do, the one thing native plants do, is they feed the bugs. They're larval hosts. If you want fish, you want birds, you want reptiles and amphibians, you need the bugs. And our native bugs cannot eat exotic plants. That's toxic. It's toxic. So switchgrass, here's some more on the left, super deep rooted, equivalent to a shrub. Deer don't touch it. It likes it wet, and it's one of the most shade tolerant of our native grasses. This is what it can look like from the landward side. If you're in your house looking out, you can make it look just like a garden. Sometimes what we'll do is we like to use sedges right behind that Hoyer log or right behind the revetment or the soil lift. We like to plant it up dense with shrubs and sedges that are going to grow right down into that revetment. And then sometimes on the houseward side of the green belt, we'll make it look more like a garden, if that's what the customer wants. It can be as florific. You can do successional bloom, just like a regular perennial garden. This is on intermediate lake, and this one has been there for over 10 years, I think. The house actually burned down and got rebuilt since we did the shoreline. We took out a seawall here. It was a corrugated steel. No, it was a concrete seawall, and we took that out and put our revetment in, just like Kevin showed you. We used the Hoyer log here. In the first or second year after we did it, it flooded really bad, and it stayed flooded for a month. The neighboring house where the seawall extended lost 9 feet of shoreline. Their flagpole was in the water. All we lost was about an inch of topsoil, and we went back and mulched with drain stone, small stone, to make sure that didn't happen again. Since then, you can see a lot of the plants that we planted have grown right down into our revetment. And there's even some semi-aquatics there. This is the same shoreline from the dock. That's at least a 10-year-old project right there. This is on Skegemog. This is Campbell's. This was done, just 3 years ago? This is like a 3-year project. This is a very wild looking, it's very wet, squishy. So we basically kind of restored a wetland. It's on Skegemog Point, which is notorious for deer pressure. Deer just eat everything. Those deer are they got nowhere to go. They eat things they don't normally eat. So we actually put an electric fence around this for the first year to get those plants established. Once they're established, then they can withstand browsing and be resilient to it. So this worked out really pretty good. That's cardinal flower there, and we didn't plant all that. That's seeded out. We planted probably about a third of that much cardinal flower, and that's just it's seeding itself out because it was happy there. Sometimes we nail it and we pick the right plant. Sometimes we just put a bunch of plants in, we try to figure it out, and then some of them work, some of them don't, and we double down and go with the winners. This time we kind of nailed it. I really like it. There's another shot of the same shoreline. Ironweed, the tall purple stuff is ironweed. That's a real good one. Deer seem to leave it alone once it's established. Let's see. Oh, this is on intermediate. This was several hundred feet of shoreline. This is kind of a wild-looking portion of that. It's starting to grow. You can see where the sand washed up and it's filling in the revetment. And this photo was a couple years ago, and the plants were just starting to grow down into the revetment. This is the same shoreline, but in a different spot. I want to say something about this plant here. This plant we love so much. It's Amsonia Tabernae montana. And the reason I want to point it out is because, you know, people are getting more into native plants, and native plants meaning native plants to Michigan or northern Michigan. But there's a limited availability. The supply is not really keeping up with the demand. So we need a larger palette of plants that are going to work. We call them workhorse plants that we can depend on. And so this Amsonia is not a Michigan native, but it's a Midwestern native. You can find it in Ohio and Indiana and Illinois, but it does not naturally occur in Michigan. But it's such a great plant. It's like, it's the ultimate workhorse plant. And I look at it as assisted migration. You know, these are plants that I feel like would end up in Michigan if they were not competed by the invasives. To broaden our palette and get the kind of plants that we need, plants that are going to look good and are going to work without choosing exotics, because a lot of exotics will work. They will definitely work. And that's part of the reason I don't really like the hyperbole about native plants, because people want their landscapes to have flowers. They want them to look good. And we don't need to be prudes about it. We can use exotic plants, and we can use them wisely. We can choose ones that aren't invasive. We can choose exotic plants that have deep roots. The formula is, you know, there's been studies done. You want 70% native plants. And then you can use some exotic plants as accents to get the kind of look that you want and the successional bloom that you want. This Amsonia, I don't really consider it so much of an exotic because it's right on our borders. And I think it's probably going to be a larval host here just like it is in Ohio. And this plant in front, I'm going to say the same thing. This is Iris cristata in front. I don't know if it naturally occurs in Michigan. In Voss's volume of Michigan Flora, the Dicox volumes, he calls Iris cristata such a close cousin to our state plant, Iris lacustris. That's our state plant, right? Our dwarf lake iris, that you can't tell them apart. And that little iris, that's a plant bomb. You put it in the ground and it just starts spreading, and it's a shallow rooted plant. You don't want all deep rooted plants. Well, we consider it a crack filler. So when we start planting up, we start with the structural plants, which tend to be deep rooted, and then the last thing that goes in is flats of these crack fillers. So you have a mosaic of deep and shallow rooted plants. And Iris cristatas, we use it all over the place. And Amsonias, here's another thing. I love talking about plants, but that's the species of Amsonia. That's Amsonia tabernae montana. It's really difficult to find it on the market anymore. And this is what happens over and over and over again. It's happening with Baptisia, happened with Penstemon. Sometimes the cultivars are better performers than the species. In this case, the species is an awesome performer, but everybody is going to the cultivars. So now Hortec used to carry this plant, now they only carry the cultivars. Ryan's trying to propagate as much as he can so we can keep using the species, because we haven't been able really to find it on the market so conveniently. This is Little Blue Stem on Intermediate Lake. We love this grass. It's a dry site plant. It needs sun. So if you have shade, if you have a wet, you can't use it, but it's another great bunch grass. It gets this beautiful purple ochre color in the wintertime. It blows in the wind. It's just a fantastic grass. This right here is a cultivar of a native sumac species called Rus aromatica. This cultivar is super popular in urban settings. It's called Rolo. So it's a dwarf version of of the species Rhus aromatica. The species gets about as big as this table. Grollo hugs the ground, and it's, as you can see, it's going to grow out. It's growing out over those stones. So, you know, most of the time our goal is that after so many years, if you're in a boat out in the lake, you don't see these strips of stone all over the place. Our plants have grown down over them and through them. The other thing about Rhus aromatica is if you take a leaf and you crinkle it up, it smells like lemon pledge. And the animals, they don't eat that stuff. They don't like it. But it's got to be kind of high and dry. It's not a wet site plant. It's a good plant for if your shoreline is dry. That's the same shoreline, looking at the little blue stem and the Ansonia, maybe some Baptisia from the house, looking out over the shoreline. And I think that's it. Oh, yeah, that's it. You folks have questions?
You showed a lot of inland lakes. What's your approach on Lake Michigan? And the historical highs and lows in the water levels? Because you speak of dry plants, 5 years ago, they would have been flooded.
Right.
They now seem to get back to dry. So what do you do in those cases? Do you plant for both sides?
There are species of willow that you will see up in the dunes that are thriving. And then you go back and they're in the water and they're still thriving. So there are species that can do both things. Potentilla is a really interesting plant. You're familiar with it. See, I think I had a picture. It'll take me a while to get there. It's the yellow flowering plant. It's in the, that was it. How do you go backwards? Okay, that's Potentilla, that yellow flowering shrub. It's used commonly. If you go to Round Lake in Petoskey, that's in the swamp. You can't, you're up to your knees in mud and water when you're seeing that plant on Round Lake in Petoskey. You can go to Fisherman's Island and be standing on top of that first dune off the shore, up perched in the sand. It's full of Potentilla, the same species. So there are species that can do both things. I don't know if that answers your question. Willow's a great one for sand and water and the big. Willows are fantastic. Shrub willows. They're the king of the workhorse plants.
You ever give the same presentation to the local nurseries, so they kind of educate them on what's so they're
A lot of people at local nurseries don't think about plants on the level that we do, but there's a nursery in Traverse City called Four Seasons Nursery. That's a great nursery. Those people are real plant people, and they're dedicated to promoting native plants. Even Hortec that we buy from, they call a lot of stuff native that they're trying to sell plants. So they want to give the plant as many labels as possible, and they call things native that, you look in Michigan flora, and it's not in there, and it's kind of hard to tell where it even comes from. And they're very knowledgeable plant people. So, people are kind of confused about what's native, and then, if you talk to ecologists and biologists, they take it right down to the genotype level. It's not native unless we collected it from right around here, and you have the genotype that occurs in the region. And as far as educating people at nurseries, I'm not on a mission, I'm not. I love to go to nurseries and talk to people about plants, but it's hard to find people that can really talk about it.
Does butterfly need more high and dry, or will it be okay in the damp
Butterfly weed is Asclepias tuberosa. It doesn't, it needs water, but it does not want to be consistently moist. It likes to dry out. Any other questions? I really love talking about plants.
There's some handouts in the back with the bioengineering, some pictures of that, and then also encapsulated soil are back there too. And then there's some other stuff with the Lake Association.